Welcome, welcome, thrice welcome to JWC Livestream. JWC Livestream, folks. This is Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. I am Ricky. Hello, everyone. And that's David down there. David, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you this evening, sir?
Wonderful. It was nice. Work today. Did some outlining, and I hope to write. All in all, I'm in a good mood, good frame of mind. I hope you're likewise.
I am. I've been very busy writing and doing
Very.
the literary life, the life of leisure.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
How about your projects? So now
Um,
that I know you're doing well, what have you been working on?
Poetry, writing poems, the novel that I've spoken about in the past, Athenaeum, still working at that, and developing the characters in it, which is very rewarding for me. Getting to know them like family members, people that I depend on, that are part of my life. So world building in a fantasy novel, which is a new experience for a poet, but certainly one that is a worthy challenge for any writer, especially a poet. I think poets should write fiction if they want to challenge themselves.
Yes.
I often talk about the small scale of being a poet, but the gigantic palette that a novelist works on is very liberating in a particular way. So it's the difference between having a tiny garden and having a continent in which to explore.
Yes.
You can explore the world in the garden, but you can also explore it by working on a much bigger scale.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more about writing in the epic mode. You know, poets should occasionally like dabble in that. I was watching a documentary, and Tolkien, in one of his fairy essays, Tolkien puts an analysis out about the three scales. Like there's a local scale, there's a heroic scale, and there's like a mythic or epic scale that goes outside. Like, in other words, the town you grew up in versus where you fought in World War II versus the Axis and the Allies, like in other words, the different scales of story modes. And I think that applies to poetry with regards to what you're saying, because you're talking about the small scale, like the wet plum out of the paper bag observation of poetry versus the grand, what did Achilles do on the beaches of Troy, that kind of thing.
Yes, I would agree with that. I was being more literal in the sense that I was talking about putting the words on the page, but that does apply very much. So
Sure.
I would agree.
Yes, absolutely. So Athenaeum and poetry, that's marvelous. Any other ornaments, projects you'd like to reflect on?
I mentioned in the last live stream, I'm working on a novel called Shutter. And I started writing that, but my next book is going to be a book called Billy, which is going to be sort of I don't know, how would you characterize Billy as I've described him to you?
Well, he's a man of violence who is righteous. That's how I see him, which is a wonderful slab to build a story on. I don't know. I mean, I've heard you talk in the terms of the outline, like I'd say within the 10 points, the 10-point synopsis of what you're trying to achieve. And I know there's going to be like little bits and pieces in there, but with the voice that you like, the way you write certain things like Smile and and especially in Athenaeum, although we're dealing with two different voices here from Billy and from Shutter. But you have a command of all of those. They're all distinct. So I have no doubt you'll be able to rise to the occasion. And of course, I'm looking forward to hearing, as I'm sure the audience is, the progress of these projects, like the way they're going to go forward. So
There's a bit of a philosophical approach that I believe all creatives in the written form can benefit from, is to continually challenging, expanding those boundaries, as if you need more territory to be a writer. So not write just poems or fiction, write nonfiction. Just write. It doesn't, the format is almost irrelevant. What's irrelevant is that its expression and it's boundless. So
yeah,
I'm one of these people that I do not believe in ivory towers, and I do not believe that poetry is better than fiction or fiction better than poetry, or that nonfiction is inferior in some way. It's about discovering the limits and the boundaries of language, and then taking it beyond the limits and seeing what we can create. That's I think a duty of every artist to not just preserve a tradition of the arts as they exist, but also as they can potentially become.
Yes, I agree. And then as far as just write, that's a great message, especially in a Rolodex where you keep experimenting. I myself, as far as projects are concerned, I was working on Compass City, and I plan on circling back to it. I wrote probably a quarter of the overall budget of that, loosey-goosey, but I'm going to get back to that. As I am eventually going to return to the Athenaeum project, I still consider it an open project, but I'm waiting for certain pieces to fall into place, and then I could do more. I could do more writing. But the stuff you've been working on in that project has been wonderful. The characters and what you're doing with the setting. There's different like things you're bringing up in the narrative, circling back to main characters. It's the way you're writing it will be able to weave it very, very easily into the main narrative. So that's wonderful. And as far as my experimenting, I've been writing this weird vampire fiction, very, very strange stuff. Warriors going out wearing exosuits made of ocean life. They're like blood drinking oceanic creatures that are kind of made into armor by this big crab. He's a telepathic crab, and he hypnotizes or conditions the exosuit to glove the main character and protect him. And then there's lots of melee violence and such, and that's been good. But I do that a lot. I do violence a lot. This has a different purpose behind it, this story, and it's not purely a slaughterhouse. But my dear aunt, who I love very much, she's been wanting me to write comedy. She thinks I'm funny when I tell stories. Some people do. A storyteller and a poet, to me, are two very wonderful rings to wear on your hand. I've been a big fan of storytelling. I took up poetry really to become a better storyteller. Honestly, if we boil it down. But the humor story is going to be a satire, and I'm getting the rhythm of humor. I'm trying to get that rhythm into an outline, like a word budget. And then it's about, the point is I'm doing experimental stuff, folks. I'm not just one trick pony Ricky over here. Like, yeah, I'm definitely writing a bunch of crazy violence, but I've also been writing poems. I've written 2 poems in the last week. And they're kind of They're kind of gruesome, maybe a little dark, but not as gruesome and dark as some others. So David and I are both creative obsessors. I don't want to speak for him, but every chance we get, we try to throw down something as far as creative writing is concerned. I have essays in the back burner too, which I eventually, before the end of March, I got to get back to that one that I was working on. It's half done. So we have all those open end, folks. And you're like, oh, how are you ever gonna? No, you keep them all open so that when you're inspired, you can just get to it, you know? Like if I feel like an essay, if I feel like a poem, if I feel like violence, if I feel like humor, you know, all that stuff is at my fingertips. All I got to do is open up and start throwing it down. I like the Museport philosophy. Well, the storm's too big. We can't get the ship into this port. Well, then if you can't write a novel, go to poetry. Can't do poetry, go to an essay. Any old port. Life is a storm sometimes. Life is very big.
I kind of like to think of it as more being like a wardrobe that a writer can have in their closet ready. If they're feeling like wearing the essay that day, that's their clothing. If
That's
they
fine.
feel a poem, that's their clothing.
Right on.
The wardrobe is and it's so these formats are just modes of expression, not deep expression in of itself. There's a much higher purpose going on, communication, I think, and testing how far we can take our language
Yes.
to reflect on the nature of being a human being.
Yes, a creative.
Yes.
No, I would certainly agree with that. I mean, back when I wrote scripts, that was the thing. When I was a diehard poet, that was a thing. And juggling all these things, it's just a different facet of the same delight. It's like holding a gem up to the sun and looking at the way the light dances. It's the creativity. There's the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, so that's wonderful. We're both, despite all the stress and uneasiness and uncertainty of the world around us, our primary world, we're still able to stay creative. That's what we want for you too, folks. Take a moment to stay creative. Write a poem, keep writing, keep working, make little projects, think about ideas, allow yourself to dream, you know? It's such a wonderful enhancement to life and helps with stress and everything else. So today, since this is sublimated poesy, we're going to read a poem. That's the new format. Today we're going to read a poem by the great poet Charles Baudelaire, and it's called Ill-Starred. You often hear Baudelaire on the lips of hippies and especially beatniks, anything countercultural from the 20th century. Baudelaire was like, the popping of popcorn on their lips. They were always free to share him. I think Morrison dug him, Kerouac dug him. I'm sure Ginsey did. So here we are. This is Ill-Starred by Charles Baudelaire. To bear a weight that cannot be borne. Sisyphus, even you aren't that strong. Although your heart cannot be torn, time is short and art is long. Far from celebrated sepulchres, toward a solitary graveyard, my heart, like a drum muffled hard, beats a funeral march for the ill-starred. Many jewels are buried or shrouded in darkness and oblivion's clouds. far from any pick or drill bit. Many a flower unburdens with regret, its perfume sweet like a secret. Wow, it's like a lightsaber, man. I mean, I ain't read Baudelaire in a minute, but now I understand what the hubbub's about. That was beautiful, like a sunrise. I mean, you could say morbid, you could say this and that, but I think it's delightful. What did you think of that, David?
It's very concise metaphoric language. It's not incredibly abstract. It would seem abstract at first. I would caution the reader to focus on the very first two lines. This gives us the message of the poem. This myth, this incredible burden. He's speaking, I think, of creativity and the endless labor of it, and how it's has an sort of an eternal nature to it that is beyond anything that is human, I think.
Yes. Yes, I should think so. In the negative, the ultimate negative, it speaks of the unbearable, the unbearable weight and the concept of a futility, which I've always associated with Sisyphus, is the futility of his labor. That may not be his particular emphasis, but as you go on, it's although your heart cannot be torn, time is short and art is long. I mean, to me, it's in your heart, you can't be stopped, but you don't have enough time, and all that you wish to accomplish looms before you. It's like some ghastly planet in the horizon that is either plunging or falling away. I can associate and identify with that frustration when it comes to my own projects and whatnot. There is never enough time, right?
Right. The title's clearly astrological in origin.
Yes.
Ill-starred means ill-fated.
Yes, of course, because the fate was wrapped in the zodiacal houses and all that in the ancient times. The great circle, the Ouroboros turning above us. So yes, that's the thing about that ancient knowledge, that esoterica. Without the mythological reference, like the knowledge of that and the concept of the title, there's some that's like you'd miss too much, and I don't know that anyone even knows who Sisyphus is anymore, let alone like the Zodiac. They're going to think it's horoscopes and all that jazz, but it is, but there's other things besides,
You think in the second stanza, you can contrast that with the reference to far from any pick or drill bit, human labors that are not creative.
Exactly.
And they are rendering up something that is temporal and has a sort of a value, a material value, whereas the value of the jewels that an artist produces are beyond value, I would say.
Certainly, and the notice that they're in sepulchres and in a solitary graveyard among the dead.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a huge like a gully that he leads us into before we come back out. To that beautiful ending. I mean, those last two lines, that's just gorgeous. Many a flower.
He was a very sensual in his language. He activated all of the senses in his imagination, I think.
Yes.
And this perfume sort of represents something that is probably, I would not say innocent, but more natural. Like it represents, well, it depends on whether or not you want to think of that, because a few lines above that, or the line just above that is about flowers, unburdened with regret. I think that's probably a, a metaphor for innocence. And your regret is uh, looking back in memory at all of the attempts that this artist, or this miner, I guess in this case, has made in life, trying to find something of eternal value.
Going from ill-starred, with which, the stars are often referenced as the jewels of the heavens. But the idea of the many jewels that are buried or shrouded in darkness and oblivion's clouds, I think, contrasted with the solitary graveyard and the celebrated sepulchres, it's almost like these articles of beauty are going to waste, laying interred with these men and women who are in fame. They're going to waste because their beauty is captured by death. It's almost like a throwback to the earlier parts, where although your heart cannot be torn, time is short and art is long. He wants to show more, do more, maybe. What do you think of that?
Certainly, he's reflecting on his efforts. So this is a personal
Yes.
poem. He realizes it's a recognition of his mortality and the eternal problems that he's speaking of. As an artist myself, as a poet and a writer, there's always that anxiety that occurs in the back of one's mind. Will I live long enough to do the work that I need to do?
I know.
And that is who I am. But will my flawed, imperfect human body, will it serve me well, or will it betray me? I
Yeah,
think in the past, I've spoken to you about the composer Frederick Chopin, writing to a friend and explaining that he felt, because of his tuberculosis, he felt his body betrayed him. And that's the one thing that terrorizes the artist more than anything, is not death, but running out of that time that he's speaking of. So when he says time is short and art is long, he just recognizes that eternal mystery, there's not enough time in which to cover it. It's infinite.
Yes. Well, certainly, I would like to be, set in a tower library and write for a few centuries and read for a few centuries, because that's how it is when you love a thing, when you love the process.
Yes.
So he's obviously wrapping that up. But the many a flower unburdens with regret, its perfume sweet like a secret. I mean, that's just forget it. That's worth the price of admission right there. Unburdens with regret, sweet like a secret, read this guy. I'm going to get his book out, and because I gotta read more poetry.
There's one of the gloomiest lines, actually, that I find is in the last two lines of the first stanza, where he writes, "My heart, like a drum muffled hard, beats a funeral march for the ill-starred."
Certainly, yeah.
So it's coded into his body, into his flesh. There's a clock, and it's running down, and then that clock is sort of this the rhythm of this funeral march.
Yep. His heart of hearts beats, the beat of his heart, the very core of his vitality, moving, and has accents of that desire, that is a big deal, especially with a poet like me, with the philosophy that I have about the heart. It's probably the most important detail, and it's folded nicely into the mixture there, So that was Ill-Starred by Charles Baudelaire. Have you anything else to say, or any other matter to weigh concerning this poem, David?
No, it's written in a very well, it gives the reader a lot of room to apply their own understanding of the metaphors, because they're very generalized and they're not specific in a contextual way. So everyone can understand, like far from any pick or drill bit. It's a very clear image.
Yes.
So it's an easy language. It may at first seem very abstract, but if you break it down and really read it, and as you begin to read his biography and we talk about his life, it will illuminate it and make it much easier to understand.
Yeah. That's the thing about this type of stuff is it's good to read something that makes you think from time to time. That it's not something that's, this is a commercial, you should buy this, or this is a corporate thing that we all just accept for some reason. You know, it's nice to have a language that you have to look at and wonder. You have to wonder at it every once in a while. Actually, use your thinking cap. I think that provides that without being so lofty and with high caliber words left and right and whatever. I mean, still, the references, we know the references, but there's plenty of intellectual in that poem too, you know. The symbolism is great. So we got to read more Baudelaire, I think. I know I will be. So that was the poem, our example poem. Now we're going to move on to the poet. Charles Pierre Baudelaire. He was born on the 9th of April, 1821, a French poet. He was born in Paris, France. He was also an essayist, an art critic, which means he wrote in that capacity, and apparently a translator, which I think, yeah, later on it gets more specific about that. It says his poems exhibit mastery of rhyme and rhythm, contain an exoticism inherent from the Romantics, and are based on observations of real life. So the observational poet, the poet that looks through the window of the mind, as we have referenced before. He was a Catholic. His father, Joseph Francois Baudelaire, a senior servant, an amateur artist, a civil servant, it says. Now, let's see. Baudelaire's biographers have often seen this as a crucial moment that I believe it's his mother, Caroline, must have remarried. So there was a lot going on for him. And apparently it led to some trauma. Trauma, no doubt, was a big inspiration. Baudelaire stated, "There was in my childhood a period of passionate love." So apparently that's in reference to his mother, who he had a tumultuous relationship with. Apparently he begged her for money often, despite whatever lucrative publishing that he was doing. Apparently he was bad with budgeting, huh? He was educated in Lyon. At 14, he was described by a classmate as much more refined and distinguished than any of our fellow pupils. So he must have had an air about him, some sort of charisma, perhaps. We are bound to one another by shared tastes and sympathies, the precocious love of fine works of literature. Apparently, though, Baudelaire was erratic in his studies, sometimes diligent, other times he was idle. He was supposed to be studying law, a popular course for those not yet decided on a particular career. But unfortunately, I guess he stained his reputation because he began to frequent prostitutes. His stepfather doesn't seem to like that too much. And about that, he was very frustrated. Oh, what grief, it says. Oh, what grief, if Charles had let himself be guided by his stepfather, his career would have been very different. He would not have left a name in literature. It is true, but we should have been happier, all three of us. So that his stepfather got sick of him and sent him on a voyage to Calcutta. He was in Calcutta in 1841 in hope of ending his dissolute habits. It provided a strong impression of the sea and sailing, the nature of that century's gentleman, and going to sea to find your wealth and to find experience and adventure and whatnot. He was riding on elephants out there. Baudelaire became known in artistic circles as a dandy and a free spender. So he never shedded that, going through much of his inheritance and allowance in a short period of time. During this time, Jeanne Duval became his mistress. She was rejected by his family. His mother thought Duval a black Venus. Oh, a black Venus. What a wonderful, I mean, terrible too, that should be her conclusion. Who tortured him in every way and drained him of money and every opportunity. Baudelaire made a suicide attempt during this period. He took part in the revolutions in 1848, wrote for a revolutionary newspaper. However, his interest in politics were passing, as he would later note in his journals. Baudelaire is one of the major innovators in French literature. His poetry is influenced by the French Romantic poets of earlier 19th century, although its attention to the formal features, verse, connections, it connects it more closely to the work of a contemporary Paramecian. For the theme and tone in his works, we see the rejection of the belief of the supremacy of nature and the fundamental goodness of man, as typically espoused by the Romantics and expressed by them in rhetorical, effusive, and public voice. And he was in favor of a new urban sensibility and awareness of individual moral complexity and interest in vice, linked with decadence. So he walked in rarefied airs, and he was, I guess, what they would eventually call bohemian, you know, like, I don't know what came first. And so the use of urban subject matter, such as the city, the crowd, individual passersby, all expressed in highly ordered verse, sometimes through cynical or ironic voice. It creates atmosphere and symbols that take on the expanded function with the poem. So beyond his innovations in versification and theories of symbolism and correspondences, and awareness of which is essential to any appreciation of the literary value of his work, aspects of his work that regularly receive much critical discussion include the role of women, the theological direction of his work, and his alleged advocacy of Satanism. Because of his drug-induced state of mind and him being perceived as a dandy, his stance regarding democracy. So during that time, he was not a monarchist. He was just a rebel all over the place. But making Paris the subject of what he viewed as modern poetry, he brought the city's details to life, the eyes and the eyes and hearts of his readers. So he wasn't looked on. He was another one of these dreaded poets. People loved reading his poetry, apparently, but he was looked on sideways as if he was a troublemaker. And his reputation was deeply soiled, it seems, with both his associates and his family. Um, but that's how some of them are. Some of them are very extreme. The poets. There's poets and there's poetry. David, hearing about all of that, what do you think about Baudelaire now, and what he was capable of versus what they reduced him to? You know, how does that touch you?
Well, there's the reflection on his life in the sense of a bourgeois, and then there's the reflection of his life as an artist exploring outer limits, the use of drugs, relations with sex workers, and this idea of smashing through the commonplace pettiness of society and its organization, its collectivism. So I think there's definitely, you spoke of his childhood and the dissolution that occurred in his childhood and his relationship to his mother. That's very primary and fundamental. His understanding of society, I would say, is probably related to his understanding of his mother and his relationship with women. And I think that that's how I would take the biography. The drug use, he used hashish and opium, I believe, and so did Rimbaud, apparently. And if you look at it from just the shattering of the mind to break through all of the preconceptions and moral values that the writer has, it's a way of getting beyond that. Sensibilities and this instinct in some writers, and it exists in myself, and I have spoken to other artists about this. We we want to place our work in the world that we live in, often not understanding that it's work for a future time where the values have changed. So I would say that the use of the drug is actually very essential to refocusing his mind. So it's not a moral issue at all. It's an intellectual one. What do you think of that?
I would agree wholeheartedly, and I would amplify further as to say he was informed by the Romantics, from the salon to the streets, as it were. By being in these places, by consorting with sex workers, by engaging in the use of at the time, that's a hard drug. They didn't look at it as a hard drug. They looked at it as a way to pass the time. Maybe he drank absinthe, but that's a counterculture. Anytime you go below the surface of what is considered dignified and this, that, and the other thing, and he was of ill repute, they associated him with Satan. Like mothers would scandalize him and fathers would look down on him because he went to places that they considered unseemly or unwholesome. And that's where he lived his life. That's probably the source of disgust for his parents as well.
His most famous work was a collection of poetry called The Flowers of Evil. And
Yes.
the title is very suggestive, and people can use their own imagination. This concept of flowers, if people think of flowers as a representation of purity and goodness and beauty, it's almost ironic that he would use this idea of flowers and evil, as if there's something that is blooming. The bloom is the pollination of the plant. So if you look at it in terms of evil flowering, maybe he's entertaining the idea of rebelling against his society in a particular way. That's a very fantastical interpretation on my part, but
No,
that's
no.
where my mind is taking me, actually.
Yeah, I strike a similar target when it comes to that. The notion of the germination of things, that they rise from seed, and then they later are bringing fertility through the pollination. What they do, how they spring up and open, And I like how he's framing a perceived evil, which again, evil is evil, but there's different cultures. There's culture, counterculture, orthodoxy, counter-orthodoxy. Those are always something that you have to bring with you as a yardstick to measure the culture that you're observing, and therefore the individual, especially one such as he that stands out. Um, so yeah, I have that book too. It's wonderful, folks. You should, if you're gonna get it, if you're gonna get into Baudelaire, that's the one you should reach for at once. Yeah, so I think it's great. You have any other comments to make on him as a poet? Because otherwise we can get to the wisdom, you know?
No, I mean, it was, I'm rather apolitical myself, but as a political action, this idea of taking people beyond the rigors and the limitations of society is giving, I would say, the individual a liberation. So maybe he was, I'm not saying that was his intended purpose in writing in this manner, but um, I think the idea of we live in a very conformist society today.
Sure it
So
is.
I did the concept of liberating the individual um, is very fascinating and provocative for me. I don't know what you would have to say about that, but
Well, I think the wisdom in all of this can be found because we hear constantly about poets who disintegrate. You know, they come apart. Like Poe died of exposure, Blake, something similar. Both of them were penniless. This man was a debtor. This Baudelaire was a debtor his whole life. Sometimes poets are, you know, they comport themselves. I don't want to say that they conform, but they moderate their behavior. Sometimes people have such a personality, and I've met several poets this way who are just like you know, they are all about the edge. They're all about the edge. They're not about the comfortable middle of society. They want to go out, not necessarily into the frontier beyond society. They want to live their society.
it's a lawless rebellion on his part. If you think about society as organizing a structure for people to live in and prosper safely, it is incredible. It's very understandable that religious leaders and politicians would view his work as being very dangerous, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the specifics, you know, specifically seditious to the monarchy. I mean,
Right.
perhaps perhaps in his poems, but he literally wrote for that newspaper that was anti-monarchist during the French Revolution. So to say that he's countercultural, he participated in a revolution, a bloody revolution, not not a hippy dippy kumbaya one, or even like the beatniks where they were struggling to break free of the conformist shell. But I'm sure there's a lot of that too. But the point is he had a vision, and apparently his parents did not approve. Um, I can sympathize with that position. I don't know if anyone else in the audience can, but you know, there's certain sons that are lovely, and there's other sons that can do no right. They
Yes,
call
we can be the dutiful son, or we can be the son that um, is regarded with regret by the members of the family. We had such high hopes for you, Ricky. We had such high hopes for you, David. What
oh, that's
went wrong?
it's strange. There's an echoing. I've heard that before.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, no, they. It's not that they used to swing this at me, but I felt that it was implied. There's an old handle for that. It's called the ne'er do well. I love the concept of the ne'er do well. At least I've grown to love it over the years. And that's the thing about this guy. He must have been a good for nothing. But look at that beautiful poem,
Yeah. Yeah.
and look at
Dreamers are dangerous. We are revolutionaries in a sense. So that is always political, I guess. But it's also as you like to say, post-political or beyond politics, beyond humanism. So this concept of time is short, art is long. That's
Yeah.
very concise frame to consider the he's putting it on the page for you to consider. So
Yes.
that's lovely.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and the wrestling between the concepts of time is money versus art is timelessness. Like art is the beautification through the mind of the natural world. It's the
It's
sub,
yeah,
you know. No, I mean,
chaos and order, right? I mean, he wanted to break chaos out and to you know, open that Pandora's box, as it were, and see what would happen. So
yes,
that is
yes.
kind of satanic, isn't it? I guess maybe.
Well, any rebellion that goes against a monarch could be viewed, especially in an esoteric lens, as a satanic enterprise. But
Right.
I've been harshly criticized for articulating that view before, and it's not one that I'm trying to lean into. Um, but again, what is the nature of the rebellion? Is it one of justice, or is it one of injustice?
I think
And
it's one of instinct. Think about what rebellion is to act. Someone could say it's to act according to one's nature. To rebel is sort of an instinctual thing because, like an animal, we fear a cage. There's that wonderful scene in the film adaptation of The Lord of the Rings where Aragorn asks her, "What do you fear most?" And she said, "A cage."
Eowyn of
Yeah,
Rohan.
yes, yes. So um, the individual fears the cage of society. I mean, is that a
No, yeah,
provocative idea or
yeah, no, and that's the thing. Um, she was technically she was technically rebelling against the will of the king, but when the king has no will that serves the people, then you have to ask yourself, is my rebellion righteous, or is my rebellion a trespass against the realm? Am I
I think it
somehow?
was an act of love towards her father. You
But
know,
that's the whole point. We know why Baudrillard was we know why he was rebelling, because the monarchy was tyrannical.
oh, why Baudelaire was rebelling. I think he was rebelling because um, he tried to blow through what was given to him to keep him in a sedated state for the rest of his life as an
Yes.
attorney or a businessman. And he decided that it didn't interest him. See, that's like, I, I often think of being born with an imagination as sort of being a curse for what some people would rather silently go to through the all the stages of their life, not rebelling against what seems like a tyranny. But um, if a young man or a young woman is born with an imagination, um, that's a bad stroke of luck for that individual, I would think, in a society at least.
In an oppressive, tyrannical society, a materialist, heavy, hard materialist society where
Aren't
there's no
all societies tyrannical, like you say, in some form or another?
to varying degrees. It all revolves around the centralized power. In the case of the monarchy, there is no appeal. If they want to put you, wall you up alive in an oubliette or cut your head off, that's what happens. Whatever, firing squad. If there's no appeal, then there can be. It's justice is very hard to serve. And when the people are starving, as it was the case in the French Revolution, no one can do anything. The economy is crashed because these rich people they wanted to keep building and building a Garden of Eden here, a Garden of Eden here, a Garden of Eden here. Meanwhile, children are dying in the
Right.
street. It's
But
only a
then what
matter
do you
of
think
time.
about the relating it, contrasting it with this concept of mental torment and torture, of living a life without expression or the freedom to express oneself? that too, I think, is important to evaluate. If we live according to all the rules of society and we go to our grave not having expressed our uniqueness, isn't that a kind of tyranny of its own?
It's to a creative, it's the deeper wound over anything else.
Right.
So yeah, and that's why he fought so vigorously against seemingly everyone. I don't know that he had a lot of peace, but his poetry is beautiful. It gives us so much. So his struggles were worth it. They were not all in vain, as it were.
Mm.
Um, yeah. The wisdom, folks, is don't be afraid to explore culture. Don't destroy yourself, but certainly live, like, be who you are, like fulfill your individuality and your breed, step apart. This is always dangerous and trembles the hearts of the conformists, because they think this is dangerous. Oh, that's evil. He's evil. They immediately give ill repute, and the horns come out. But look, a lot of people could have said that the monarchy was evil, that then the tyranny of the government of that time, the economy was evil.
Right. It's centralized power, right? So
That's
as you
right.
speak about, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the essence of monarchy. There's no, other than something like Stalin, there's no more centralized power than a monarchy. So
Or Mao.
yeah, any of those
Right.
fiends who did such violence and wreaked such havoc on their people. And that's the thing. Sometimes you got to rise. Sometimes you got to write poetry, and you have to elevate the spirit and inspire that ascension of the masses. But other times it's you yourself who has to rise. It all depends on what's going on.
It's
Uh,
interesting you used the word elevate actually just now, because last week uh, we did a show on Reynaldo Inares, and in the poem "The Parade Ends," he's elevating the reader beyond the tyranny of Cuba and taking them out of that prison. So it's a very coincidental that you use that word.
yeah, well, I view a deep, impenetrable communism that has no, which they inevitably, I mean, they inevitably become that way according to history. But any that and a monarchy, they're almost the same thing, because you can't stop the authority from crushing you, even if it's completely unjustified. Like, you have to, like, there has to be an appeal process. That's what this was interested in. And it seems like he didn't like being tyrannized in any capacity. He didn't listen to anyone. So he was willful, intensely individualistic. And monarchists and communist dictators don't like that. They don't like that. They don't like the individual stepping out and saying, "This is what I am. I'm not you." They want everyone to go. They want everyone to say the same mantra and repeat the same thing, and therefore don't express yourself. It's like you're saying, David. You hit the nail right on the head. The notion of a lack of expression was too sore for him, and he wanted more and more of that expression to happen. And that's a poet. At least some poets like I've met. Um, I used to be wilder when I was young, so I'm hip to all that. So this has been a great show. We've given you Baudrillard. We've given you Baudelaire. Sorry, I keep saying the wrong one. Baudelaire. We keep giving you, like, we gave you the poet. We gave you his time. We gave you a poem that exercises his talents and the wisdom that we learned. I think it's great. This has been JWC Livestream. This is Sublimated Poesy with David and Ricky. Sublimated because it goes beyond, and poesy because we're always working on our creativity. We're always working on our craft. But now it's plug time. Head over to joeswritersclub.com, please. Check out our authors' bios and our blogs. Sign up at joeswriters.club and join our forums. Head over to social media, check out Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and most importantly, our YouTube channel where you find our shows it's pretty much a weekly basis. We do our best. Life gets busy. And stay creative and, do the work. Joe's Writers Club can't make you a better writer. Like, you have to do that yourself. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make you a different writer. Diversification and exploration of creativity. And we want to inspire you. Inspiration is the highest coin of the realm. Read some poems, go on a trip, go to the park, walk around and see things unfolding. Write them down in a notebook. Seek to be inspired. Inspiration is such a wonderful thing. And creativity, all those things that lead to a transcendence, and you never know what you're missing. I want to thank David for being on the show today. I had a real blast making this content, and I hope it was likewise for you, sir.
It was. Thank you. It was very inspirational. This is the best part of the show, is to just let loose and see what happens.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again real soon, folks. Take care. Stay creative.